My name is Michael Richards from the Faculty of Theology and Religious Studies of KU Leuven. I'm pleased to have this moment to present to you a brief introduction to theological education at Catholic institutions of higher learning in the United States. To be sure, it's a diverse context, geographically, culturally, and theologically. As such, a singular short narrative on higher theological education in the United States is nearly impossible to achieve. So the narrative that I offer in this brief introduction is one that is informed by my own experience and interpreted by my own research. I'll start with a short overview of Catholic universities and colleges in the United States. Then I'll speak about the scope, objectives, and style of theological education at those institutions. I'll end with a few thoughts on the challenges and opportunities facing Catholic institutions of higher education today. Before I continue, just a small but important note about terminology. In this presentation, I speak about universities and colleges as a sort of categorical reference that I use to mean all accredited institutions of higher learning that grant degrees. This is simplified language because indeed this category includes not only comprehensive research universities and smaller liberal arts colleges, but also degree-granting technical schools, seminaries, and in the case of state institutions, also the extensive array of what we call community colleges. So just by way of a bit of social and historical foundation, Catholic higher education in the United States is the enterprise of a religious minority that has long fought for recognition and equality within a society that is typically dominated, or perceived to be typically dominated, by a Protestant narrative of American religion. A research study from the Pew Research Institute in 2024 estimates that around 62% of U.S. adults identify as Christian. And when breaking apart that statistic according to identity groupings, that amounts to about 19% of adults who identify as Catholic, a subgroup that is significantly outsized by the 39% who identify as Protestant in some form or other, and the 29% who identify as religiously unaffiliated, meaning things like atheist, agnostic, nothing in particular, and so forth. Of course, these figures are national averages, and they vary significantly from region to region. So as the enterprise of a religious minority, there are today approximately some 220 Catholic universities and colleges in the United States, serving a combined student population of almost 675,000 students, according to the most recent report of the National Center for Educational Statistics. Over the past 40 years, the total number of institutions has declined slightly, while the total student population has increased significantly, an indication that many institutions have and are growing rapidly in a short period of time. So within the broader category of religious-affiliated universities and colleges, Catholic institutions in the United States account for just over 1/4 of the approximately 850 institutes of higher learning. Yet Catholic institutions represent only about 6% of all colleges and universities in the country, a total that amounts to approximately 3,900 institutions. The oldest such Catholic institution in the United States is Georgetown University in Washington, D.C., which was founded in 1789, the same year that the American Constitution came into effect, and the same year that the first American Catholic diocese was established. The number of Catholic institutions grew significantly in the middle decades of the 19th century, alongside the rapid expansion of Catholic education in general. This expansive growth was driven by several converging factors. First, these decades saw new, large waves of Catholic immigrants arriving from European regions such as Ireland and Italy, Portugal, Poland, and elsewhere. Second, and at the same time, anti-Catholic sentiments were on the rise at this time in parts of the country, which is to say a kind of anti-immigrant sentiment towards these new waves of poor and working-class Catholics. So Catholic bishops at the time were quite eager to establish schools, colleges, and universities that they hoped would not only educate young people in the Catholic faith tradition, but would also prevent a kind of cultural assimilation into what they perceived to be that Protestant agenda in government schools and society at large. Catholic universities and colleges saw another large wave of growth in the decades following the Second World War, fueled by the baby boom of the 1940s and 50s, and by what we call the GI Bill. That's a sort of federal policy that allocated financial support for the higher education of millions of American servicemen. The late 20th century and early 21st century have seen a number of significant changes in many Catholic institutions, including, for example, admissions policies that now allow for both men and women, institutional mergers, some closures, some new openings, and a significant amount of financial investment and the development of infrastructure, and of course, rapidly changing demographics in religious and ethnic identities among students and staff. In the description of Michael Rizzi from the University of Pittsburgh, today's American Catholic universities and colleges are, quote, diverse institutions with diverse missions that are independently incorporated and maintain a cooperative relationship with church authorities, end quote. They broadly compete, quote, with the entire U.S. education sector, including community colleges that provide cheaper, more accessible education, end quote. Many Catholic colleges and universities, although privately incorporated and independently governed, are accredited by the same agencies that oversee the accreditation of state universities. And most of these Catholic institutions receive substantial amounts of government funding in the form of grants and student tuition loans. These mechanisms for funding and accreditation often come with requirements, conditions, and consequences that may at best need navigating or at worst feel restrictive, especially in terms of the institution's attempt to realize a particular Catholic identity, culture, and educational program. For theology departments in particular, this can create a precarious financial position where theological programs must justify their existence against more pragmatic, career-focused offerings. So in sum, Rizzi points to a delicate balancing act. Quote, Catholic higher education has long experimented with the right balance between the European traditions of the Church and the economic and regulatory realities of American academic culture. And there has never been an era yet in which these tensions were clearly and incontrovertibly resolved, end quote. So more specifically now, on the question of Catholic identity and religious diversity. Catholic institutions in the United States are definitely not all the same, although there are some general patterns, as highlighted in recent research. In a study of approximately 180 Catholic universities and colleges, nearly all institutions, quote, refer to their Catholic and their religious order identity, if applicable, in their mission statement. In fact, only 2 institutions did not mention a Catholic or order identity, and only 3 mentioned the order alone. Furthermore, all offer Mass on campus. In addition, 82% of institutions affirmed their Catholic identity in the About Us section of their website. And in addition, 3/4 of institutions explicitly require the president to be Catholic, and over 2/3, or 69%, require at least 1 Christian course of all students and have only Christian student groups on campus. The majority of Catholic institutions, however, do not require 2 or more Christian courses. Only about 42% require at least 2. Nor do they refer to Christian reasoning in their code of conduct. That's only about 46% of them. Or use Christian reasoning to justify any part of that code of conduct. Only about 23% seem to do that. In addition, beyond the president, less than 5% of institutions require faculty or staff to be Catholic, and only 2% require students to be Catholic. End quote. So in regards to religious diversity among the student populations, unfortunately, national data on student religious diversity at Catholic universities and colleges is not available at the present, which signals an important area for future research. Speaking now a bit more directly on the scopes and objectives of theological education, across the diverse landscape of Catholic universities and colleges, theological education is also diverse in its scope and objectives, given that programs and practices for theological education are generally set at the local level. This is typically done in some form of broad cooperation with competent church authorities, whether Episcopal and/or congregational. A recent random sampling of websites from geographically diverse universities suggests that typical objectives for theological education include categories like theological knowledge, understanding the Catholic faith tradition, skills and methods for theological research, and personal synthesis and application of theology. Some schools place a greater degree of emphasis on the interaction between Catholic theology and the cultural context, while others less so. For a major in theology, students are typically required to follow courses that are broadly associated with the traditional theological domains of Scripture, doctrine and systematics, ethics, ecclesiology, sacramentology, and the pastoral context. Some institutions also include other areas associated with religious studies, such as survey courses in other religious traditions, phenomenology and lived experience, and philosophy of religion. In some cases, institutions integrate the fields of religious studies and Catholic theology into a single program, while other institutions maintain separate programs in theology and religious studies elsewhere in the domains of social sciences or humanities. Other institutions still may offer only one program or the other. In regards to the styles of teaching and learning in theological education, this question is also characterized by broad diversity. However, as a general picture, many institutions emphasize instructional principles such as active engagement, collaborative learning, independent research, and critical thinking. It's generally expected that theology classrooms at all levels are interactive and allow for a substantial amount of time for student contributions and professor feedback. Of course, the professor remains the expert who anchors the content, and students are expected to participate to a large extent in discussions and projects that invite them to demonstrate their own thinking and test their own ideas. Yes, lectures remain important, but they are typically seen as one component among many in the classroom environment. The syllabi of courses often include a combination of required readings and supplementary sources from a diversity of authors, and students are given some degree of choice in the readings and sources to be studied. It's generally thought that diversity and choice in this way promotes both critical thinking and engagement. As a requirement for each course, students are typically expected to produce an original knowledge-sharing project like a research paper, a research presentation, or a project of practical application. Those original products typically constitute a significant percentage of the student's mark. Oral examinations are extremely rare, and written examinations, although also infrequent, are more likely found at the undergraduate level, but much less likely at the graduate level. Like American academia in general, theology schools have been shifting to blended learning formats where content and interaction are hosted both in the physical classroom and in an online classroom of videos, tutorials, posts, discussion fora, feedback channels. So today's professors and students are expected to operate comfortably and successfully across those formats. Finally, on the question of theology classrooms, a unique aspect of graduate level theology in the United States is that they often include a large number of students well beyond their 20s, an aspect that I think is valued by many. This is often due to the high expenses of graduate level study at private institutions in the United States, which can require students to draw upon their savings or take on educational loans and/or receive partial support from their employers. But this also means that a typical graduate theology classroom benefits from a rich diversity of people with real-world experience as teachers, ministers, and professionals of all kinds. Students at the graduate level are typically expected to bring this real-world experience into the classroom as part of their critical lens. So as this presentation draws to a close, I would like to highlight three sets of challenges and opportunities. First, given the increasing diversity in society, and thus we can presume the increasing diversity amongst students and professors, there remains a looming question for Catholic theological education and Catholic institutional identity. How do theology professors and the Catholic University at large engage students of diverse theological backgrounds and prepare them for a social context of diversity and difference? To be sure, this is not a question only for Catholic universities, but the Catholic faith tradition has the unique potential to contribute in a meaningful way at the university level. An opportunity for institutions and theology departments is therefore to shape a distinctive Catholic identity within a pluralistic landscape. In this context, there is a unique opportunity for an identity that is rooted in a Catholic commitment to dialogue with diversity and difference. Such an identity cannot only distinguish Catholic institutions in a crowded educational marketplace, it can also respond to the changing demographics by bringing forth the Catholic tradition into this dialogue with others. A second challenge, given the role that American Catholic universities and colleges occupy at the intersection of church, society, and students in all their diversity, there are frequent questions of how to understand this intersection between the Catholic faith tradition and the pluralizing, secularizing culture more broadly. Now, this is not a challenge unique to Catholic institutions in the United States, nor is it one unique to this present generation. An opportunity amidst this challenge is for those students and professors seeking to discover new relevance for the Catholic tradition through new and renewed efforts at recontextualization, and a mutually critical dialogue between tradition and culture. Catholic theological education has the opportunity to demonstrate the value of theological inquiry for addressing contemporary issues. By emphasizing the interaction between Catholic theology and the cultural context, institutions can position theological education as vital to addressing ethical, social, and cultural challenges. And finally, a third challenge, given the very high costs of private education at Catholic institutions, students, and especially graduate-level students, often come to the classroom with high expectations of quality, both in terms of content and instructional style. The pressures placed on the institution by these student expectations can often translate into a professional culture that emphasizes student success and student satisfaction in the evaluation of professors in their teaching function. Now, an opportunity in this is definitely for those professors who develop their sense of creativity, originality, student engagement, and to a certain extent, self-promotion, for example, through active social media accounts and frequent public engagements. Those professors who think in these ways beyond their research and towards engagement with the social context and the success of students individually are likely to see the appreciation of many alumni. So in conclusion, you can see as a summary that theological education at Catholic universities and colleges in the United States is a diverse and complex question. Although no singular short narrative is adequate, I have attempted in this brief presentation to sketch some of the background and trends in broad strokes. Catholic theological education has strong potential for the future if it can continue to respond to the changing market of American higher education in a way that continues to bring forth the Catholic faith tradition in a dialogical and self-reflective way.